Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, TJ Mabarty. Happy Friday. Today is April 19th and we have a loaded show ahead, diving into a lot of NBA playoff talks with the official postseason starting up this weekend. We've already had a handful of play-in tournament games that have taken place over the course of the week. We have the final ones tonight to determine the 8 seeds, and then the games officially tip off tomorrow afternoon for actual postseason play. So we will be diving into all things surrounding that. We're going to be starting off the show by talking about the Denver Nuggets playoff path and sort of the difficult stretch that they have ahead of them in order to try and repeat as NBA Finals champions. Then we're going to be diving into the Knicks and 76ers series. In the second segment, we'll do more of a general view of all things NBA playoffs in the third, before finishing off the show actually talking some NFL and just going a little bit rapid fire around the league, talking about these various wide receiver situations that have become some big stories as contract negotiations push on. The NFL draft draws closer, meaning we could potentially see some of these players move, and we will dive into all of that. But before we do, just a reminder to like, follow, and subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Helps us out a ton here. If you are a live viewer, definitely be sure to use the comment section to give us your thoughts on all of the latest happenings in sports. And if you would consider leaving a tip or donation, you can use the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker. That is gsmcpodcast.net. Anything would be greatly appreciated. Now, I wanted to start off the show by talking about the Denver Nuggets and what the upcoming postseason looks like for them, considering the fact that by many, including myself, I do believe that this is the best team in the NBA. But what is interesting, if you look in terms of NBA Finals odds, it has been well documented, at least on this show itself, the fact that the Boston Celtics are the favorites. Now, this isn't necessarily surprising. The Celtics have the best record in the NBA this season, and specifically, and sort of what I want to dive into here, is the fact that the Nuggets in the Western Conference have a much more difficult strength of schedule for their playoff path. They are facing off against the Los Angeles Lakers in the first round. This is a rematch from the Western Conference Finals last year. So I guess we will sort of start there, talking about that series, because this is one that is definitely outside of this series, I believe, and the Knicks 76ers series in the Eastern Conference. I think that this is going to be the one that have most people's eyes on it. Of course, LeBron James, Nikola Jokic, the best player in the NBA, and this rematch. And I do think that there is a real chance this can be. Last season, again, if you just look at the 4-0 sweep for Denver, you could say that you could maybe think that it wasn't competitive, but in reality, every single game was a close one. It was the smallest margin of victory between any two teams in a sweep in NBA playoffs history. And now they get this rematch a year later, where I do believe that the teams have evened out to some levels, where you look from a Lakers perspective on this, and you've gotten a healthier version of both LeBron James and Anthony Davis. LeBron was dealing with the foot injury that kept him out for a significant amount of time last year. Now he was able to come back and play through it, and really through that playoff run, it didn't seem like he was hindered necessarily, but it was something that was sort of underlying. And now we come into this year, and you have these massive numbers of games played from LeBron and AD, who have both been sort of inconsistent in terms of being able to just stay on the court. Anthony Davis playing a career high in games played over the course of a season. And it's not just the two of them, where this is a different version of D'Angelo Russell, where really since December or so, when the trade rumors started coming out about him, he has taken his game to another level, has been one of the legitimate best shooters in the NBA this season. Now, there is something, I like D'Angelo Russell. I feel like for a handful of years, he's almost in that similar archetype, and this might be disrespectful considering how these past seasons went, but I'm just talking about archetype wise, such as a Jordan Poole, where he has these really high highs, but some of the decision making and the buy-in from a team perspective can be questioned. But at the same time, Russell now at his more mature age, he does seem to be a lot more locked in and more reliable. So I'm not saying that this is going to fall out, but I also wouldn't be shocked necessarily if things did sort of fall apart from that perspective. Again, not trying to predict anything on that, but all that to be said, I bring this up because D'Angelo Russell has been significantly better than he was last season at the time. Now, on the other side, and the Lakers in general, a better three-point shooting team than they were last year, in large part because of the fact that D'Angelo Russell has been able to bring that level of offense that he has. Now, still pretty top-heavy on the Lakers side of this, but in a similar way, the Nuggets do not have the same level of depth that they did last season. Now, they have a lot of pieces that they can throw out there and have be contributors, but they don't have necessarily, and we've talked about this on the show before, but the veteran Jeff Green minutes, the Bruce Brown who would stand in the corner and shoot 50-60% from, I forget which side, but specifically one side of the corner, I believe it was the left corner, he was automatic from, and they just don't necessarily have that. Bruce Brown also played a significant role last year in being a rotational defender. I really like Christian Brown. I really like Peyton Watson as well, the way that the two of them can come in, provide those energy type minutes, and be effective for the Nuggets. But I don't think that they necessarily have the same level of flexibility from a depth perspective that they did last year. And we've seen at times, specifically in that stretch to end off the regular season. I know Murray played the last 4 or 5 games, but there was a stretch there where Jamal Murray wasn't playing, and you could see that in those instances outside of Nikola Jokic, there really wasn't much else going on. And even still, we saw the massive discrepancy in the regular season this year in terms of Jokic when he is on the court versus when he is off the court. A plus 23.7 points per 100 possession rating in the NBA when he is on the court versus when he's off the court for the Nuggets. Basically, in simpler terms, they get outscored a lot more than they outscore other teams when Jokic is not available for them. He is the nucleus of nucleuses in terms of being the centerpiece of that team, and I do feel like there is just, a little less there from a supporting cast standpoint. Now, I am picking the Nuggets in this series, and I expect them to do so in 5-6 games. So I do sort of talk about this whole series just for the perspective of, it's not a total shoo-in that they win this series, and LeBron James hasn't won a game actually in Denver in something like 4 calendar years at this point. That's not even a, hyperbole. It's just a fact. And playoff LeBron is a different animal. And I do think that the Lakers are going to be a tough out. Much more difficult than the Timberwolves were last year, when the Timberwolves headed into the playoffs were a mess. There was tons of chemistry issues. The Kyle Anderson, Rudy Gobert fight had just happened. Jaden McDaniels took himself out of the series by breaking his hand punching a wall in the final game of the regular season. So I do think that they are going to be pushed a little bit more in their initial situation here. And then from there, they're going to have to play the winner of the Timberwolves versus the Phoenix Suns. And those are both teams that you can't necessarily overlook either. And then you go into the Western Conference Finals where there's a chance that you're going to be playing a Luka Doncic and the Mavericks, who notably beat the Nuggets in a close one on St. Patrick's Day. It could be the Clippers, and if they're rolling to that point, as long as they're fully healthy, they are a very formidable opponent. So all this to say, I expect the Nuggets to still come out of the Western Conference, but they do have a lot on their plate ahead of them even to make it to the finals, where in comparison to the Eastern Conference with the Boston Celtics, who are the betting favorites to win their respective conference, it is a much different picture where the Celtics are the 1 seed. They are going to be playing the winner of the game tonight between the Miami Heat and Chicago Bulls. The Heat could have been a very tough out and a potential upset pick for a lot of people if it weren't for the fact that Jimmy Butler is expected to miss multiple weeks with the MCL injury that he suffered in the Heat's game on Wednesday night. And the Chicago Bulls, for I think one of the most fun, mediocre teams in recent years. They have a lot of very likable players on their roster, and I don't think that, the Celtics... I mean, the Celtics do probably win that series in 5 games. I like the Bulls a lot, and I feel like they can be a tough out on any given night. In terms of a series as a whole, a much different picture. Then they get some unproven teams between the winner of the Cavaliers and Magic series, and then a chance to face off in the Eastern Conference Finals as well, where the Knicks are the second best team in the Eastern Conference. I do feel like they are at a different level when they are fully healthy. It seems like that's going to be the case. OG Anunoby is really the one in particular that I'm looking at in terms of whether or not that, because Brunson, knock on wood, he's been durable this season, but Anunoby, we already know that Julius Randle is going to be out for the series, but I think that Anunoby would play a massive role in that potential Boston-New York series. But I still feel like with the level of offensive creation outside of Jalen Brunson, the Knicks are, a little bit lackluster there. And they've had some role players that have been absolutely massive for them this season. Dante DiVincenzo being a most improved candidate, other than the fact that he actually came short in terms of just seconds, which is a real travesty. I like the 65 game limit for being eligible for postseason awards, but that is a pretty tough look for DiVincenzo, who played the entire season for the Knicks. But anyways, I just feel like in comparison, these two teams that have seemed like it's going to be, I wouldn't quite say a shoo-in necessarily, but these two teams that seems like through the regular season were somewhat on a collision course to meet in the finals, the Nuggets do just have it a lot tougher than the Celtics do. Now, I think they'll be able to overcome that as long as they're fully healthy. I do think that they are the best team in the NBA. I mentioned health. It's obviously a massive part of NBA history. If you look at recent years, there always seems to be at least 1 or 2 injuries that sort of derail what we expect to happen in the postseason. Now, last year with the Nuggets probably was a little bit of the exception. If you're really looking to, find some key injuries along the way, you can look at the Clippers in the first round with Kawhi Leonard, who ended up missing that entire series. You had Jason Tatum in the first 2 minutes of Game 7 against the Miami Heat in the Eastern Conference Finals. That was another example of a key injury. He may not have even been good to go. But again, we're getting into hypotheticals there. There's really no need. But we've already seen so far in this playoffs with Giannis going down a couple weeks ago, with Joel Embiid still battling back from his injury, the status surrounding Kawhi Leonard, it seems like nobody in that Clippers organization really knows what his status is going to be headed into the postseason. The injury bug is always a prominent factor of how the playoffs play out. And I know it's a little bit of a bad omen to even necessarily be talking about it, but I did just sort of want to say that as a reminder of how these things play out. And the Nuggets, I feel like, are very perceptible if anything were to happen. Hopefully it doesn't, but I don't feel like they have the same level of depth. But in general, with their playoff path, I think that there really wasn't much that they could have done, because even if they were the 1 seed, they would be playing the winner of the Sacramento Kings and New Orleans Pelicans, who might be without Zion Williamson. So that probably would have been the one area in which they could have found their way into a much more favorable situation. But I also feel like the second round matchup of the Clippers and Mavericks, again, assuming that Kawhi is playing, that would maybe be more difficult than playing the winner of Minnesota Suns, who, again, I don't know why I'm talking so much about the injuries, but it really is the more you look at it, because Minnesota, how is Karl Anthony Towns going to look as he continues to work his way back into playing shape after missing the amount of time he did with the meniscus injury? So really only time will tell here. I have the Denver Nuggets coming out of the first round, and coming out of the Western Conference in general. And if they are going to face off against the Boston Celtics, we got 2 very close games during their regular season series during the regular season, and I think that we could be in for another very entertaining one again. Nuggets came out on top 2-0 against the Celtics this year. I feel like we would be likely looking at a Nuggets championship, but that is all we have time for on this. Stick with us, and we will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, no, this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose, if it's some losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We just finished off talking some Nuggets playoff path. Now we are going to be switching sides to the Eastern Conference and talking about the highly anticipated matchup between the 76ers and the Knicks. This is a little bit of an unprecedented 7-2 matchup in the first round, considering the fact that Embiid was on his way to potentially being a repeat MVP if it were not for the torn meniscus injury he had sometime during the winter, caused him to miss the majority of the season. The 76ers probably would have been the 2 seed instead of the Knicks if Embiid had played out the entire year, but that wasn't the case, and the 2 seed just ended up being available for the Knicks. And I definitely don't want to diminish them, because I do think when fully healthy, it is a very competitive roster, and I do think that they're the second best team in the Eastern Conference. But I also wouldn't say, with all of the injuries the Knicks have dealt with themselves throughout the regular season, that they are the traditional strength of a 2 seed. And the fact that, it's the Nuggets as the 2 seed, I think the Nuggets are miles better than the Knicks are. But again, not to fully diminish the Knicks here, because they earned their 2 seed, but it does make for this situation where, if you look on DraftKings, the odds for this series are actually dead even, both teams at -110, and I think that we could be in for a really good one. And I sort of wanted to touch on it. This is one of the series that we weren't able to when we first did our playoff previews, considering the fact that we didn't know who the Knicks would be playing. And the 76ers are such an entertaining matchup for a variety of ways. The fact that we have these two big-time markets facing off against one another, and two fan bases that are really itching at the idea of a, long-term postseason run here. I feel like 76ers fans, at least the ones that I have in my life, were sort of out on the season once Embiid went down. This wasn't the year, yada yada, but now sort of talking themselves back into it at this point. And again, it's not that the Knicks are any slouch of a team, but I don't feel like they are this unattainable juggernaut that the 76ers won't have a puncher's chance. That being said, I am going to lean with the Knicks in this series, because of the fact that with Philadelphia, it's just clear that Joel Embiid still is not 100% healthy. Even in his game against Miami on Wednesday night, he was repeatedly grabbing at his knee. This is a superstar in Joel Embiid, who one of his main sort of negatives surrounding him is the fact that he's never been able to stay healthy. And through the first handful of years in his career, which I do feel like is tied into the injuries, is his conditioning hasn't been great. And he was able to overcome the conditioning as his years went on. And I'm not sure really at this point if some of the laboring that we see in these games that he's played, and the last few weeks of the regular season plus this play-in game, I don't know if the laboring we see is an exhaustion standpoint, in terms of he's not in playing shape because he missed as much time as he did, or because his knee is still bothering him to that extreme level. And, it was awesome to see. It was a thrilling game on Wednesday night with these two teams facing off. But, really, both Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid did not look great in this one. And I know that Embiid had himself a nice fourth quarter to sort of help seal this one. But if it wasn't for the likes of a Nick Batum sort of going nuclear in the last quarter and a half for them, with the two-way effort, with the three-point shooting. Now, again, the remainder of the team was also very, uncharacteristically off from three. It's not like they are one of the best three-point shooting teams in the league necessarily, but Buddy Hield, he did have one big three, but other than that, he sort of struggled from the field. Tyrese Maxey was really nice in transition and some of those drives as well, but he wasn't operating under the same level that he typically does. And it's going to be very fascinating to me, because the game, at least on Wednesday night with the 76ers and Heat, that was a very physical one. The Knicks are sort of they're a team that their identity is defense, and they can be extra physical, as most Tom Thibodeau coach teams typically are. And I think that this is going to be very contentious between, again, the New York fans and the Philly fans. I think that it is going to be really fun to see. Bill Simmons mentioned in a podcast recently the out loud groans we're going to hear in Madison Square Garden when Joel Embiid does draw his fouls, as he always does, will be very interesting. It's just going to be funny, I think, the reactions of the Knicks fans seeing how it feels on the other end. Not that they're necessarily a foul baiting team. I do feel like Jalen Brunson is very crafty. I wouldn't say he's I know the term that's thrown out a lot is a free throw merchant. I wouldn't consider him that, but he does definitely know how to sort of, and with, again, patience and IQ, he does it in a smart way, not a cheap way where he's, physically going out of his way to do anything that I think is considered loophole-ish, but he knows how to put opposing teams in compromising positions, and I just feel like there's going to be, I don't want to say a level of toxicity, but it's just going to be a very entertaining series, and this is a situation here for the 76ers where, to some degree, they are lucky to almost be in this position. The fact that Joel Embiid was able to come back, they luckily didn't have that much competition in the play-in tournament and around there that the teams in the Western Conference had, where really from the 6th seed down through, I'd call it the 8th seed, really, and 9 seed probably even as well, was very contentious in terms of figuring out that playoff seeding. There was an extra juice to the end of the regular season for them. That wasn't so much the case in the Eastern Conference because Chicago and Atlanta were both so far back, but Philadelphia still treated it like it really meant something. They were trying to pull themselves out of that catch up to Indiana, and they came close. And that whole time I was saying that isn't necessarily the priority. It's just making sure Joel Embiid is okay. And they sort of accomplished both, because no, they didn't work their way out of the play-in tournament. They still won the last 8 games of the regular season, I believe it was, and put themselves in a position where, it would have been really interesting. I mean, obviously, with the news surrounding Giannis, it would have made a difference if they were able to get to that 6th seed. But here they are, one way or another, with a chance to actually do something against the Knicks. Now, again, it's going to take a level of play from Tyrese Maxey that we know he's capable of. He's shown it in flashes, but I think he is going to be, really the centerpiece here, where I obviously don't think that the Knicks have necessarily the scheme on defense to limit Joel Embiid like the Miami Heat did in that play-in tournament, running that type of zone. Kevin Love working tirelessly to deny the entry passes to Embiid and sort of made the Sixers adjust on the fly. Spoelstra, the coach that he is, would have made things very difficult if that were a longer series as well. But regardless, Tom Thibodeau doesn't necessarily have that, but he does have the personnel, I believe, that is probably even a little better than Miami in terms of throwing different defensive looks with the different types of rotations they can run out there with Isaiah Hartenstein and Mitchell Robinson in the front court from the center position. OG Anunoby, of course, an undersized player that is more than capable of guarding the 5, and could be an interesting matchup that they throw out there as well. Some of their guards as well, just in terms of being able to dig down in a double team and apply some pressure with Josh Hart, with Dante DiVincenzo, and to some degree Jalen Brunson as well, should be a very and I didn't even mention Deuce McBride in that same category as well, where I think he's more than capable of being a physical defender, and those same physical defenders are going to be on the other end attacking Tyrese Maxey. I really, as awesome as the moment was, you're not going to be able to get a 20-point per game version of Nick Batum. He averaged 5 points per game during the regular season. Now, can he just be a reliable three-point shooter? That's all they can really ask for. They're going to need more from Buddy Hield as well to be able to space things out. Again, that Wednesday matchup, I know I keep going back to it here, but that was a pretty ugly offensive performance on both ends of that one. Now, granted, Miami, like I gave them credit for, was running a tremendous defensive scheme to sort of throw off Philadelphia's game. And now, removed from that, can Philly's offense operate in the half court more? We saw them do it in the second half of that game, so I'm definitely not saying it's impossible by any means. But I think that all in all, this, whether or not I think the Knicks are going to win, I don't think it's going to be easy for them necessarily. Now, again, being even odds, that does sort of tempt me because I would say I'm fairly confident in the Knicks being able to win, but it's definitely not a lock by any means. And there is a reason that the odds are this close. I think that the public also, to some degree, loves Joel Embiid and so much that he is a mismatch problem for any type of matchup he's up against. But I think the Knicks also have the types of players available to be able to disrupt them to a certain degree. But let me know what you think about this series in the comments section. Ultimately, I think I'm going to go Knicks in 6, but let me know what you think for sure as we wrap this segment up, and we will be headed into our second break of the show, where when we come back, I want to look at some of the greater trends here with the first round matchup and the upcoming weekend ahead. So stick with us and we will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We are now headed into our third segment of the day, and I want to look ahead to the upcoming weekend ahead for the NBA playoffs. We will briefly start off here with the games that are going to be taking place tonight between the Chicago Bulls and Miami Heat in the Eastern Conference fighting for the 8th seed, and the Sacramento Kings and New Orleans Pelicans in the Western Conference. So, brief thoughts here before actually getting into the postseason. As things currently stand, Jimmy Butler and Terry Rozier have both been ruled out for Miami, which does have a lot of people sort of leaning in the direction of the Heat. They are 1.5 point favorites, but I feel like the Bulls are in a very intriguing spot here where we've seen with them really all season. They win games they're not supposed to, and they lose games they're not supposed to. The inconsistency with them has been a real storyline, and this is a make or break moment for a lot of players on this team. Now, in terms of their sort of injury report, because of what we saw happen on Wednesday as well, where Alex Caruso ended up getting his foot stepped on by Andre Drummond as the two just collided at half court. He ended up missing the majority of that game. He is cleared to play. Now, to what level is he going to be available? I don't know necessarily if it is the same foot. It's being listed as an ankle injury, but I don't know if it's the same foot that he was dealing with to end the regular season or not. What level is he necessarily going to be able to play out there? I would imagine in the minutes he does play, he's going to probably be matched up against Tyler Hero for the most part, because outside of that, with Miami, really, it just doesn't seem like they're going to have that many on-ball creators. I am very interested to see if any of these sort of backup ball handlers that Miami brought in this season from DeLon Wright and Patty Mills, if either of them end up getting some run at the point guard position, as they just are sort of fighting for their lives in this situation without Jimmy Butler. But I think I'm going to lean with the Bulls in this one. But again, any Bulls game really does feel like a coin toss to me. But that's the direction I'm going to go with. And then the other game, the Kings and the Pelicans, we have Zion Williamson being ruled out. And it's really difficult in this situation as well, where I think that I'm going to lean with the Kings in this one as well. So as things currently stand, going with the two underdogs in these individual games. The key storyline in this one is going to be, how does Brandon Ingram respond? He was dealing with an injury to end off, a knee injury in particular, to end off the regular season. Caused him to miss 12 or so games in a row. Came back for their last game against the Lakers and was available in the play-in tournament game that they played against the Lakers on Tuesday, but his minutes were restricted, just 25 minutes, and he really didn't have it. He looked to have flashes of his old self, I thought, in the first quarter, but really from there was just very inefficient, and the team ended up going in a different direction, rolling with Trey Murphy and Herb Jones and some other bench players as well to close out that fourth quarter, where they made their sort of a run. We talked about this the other day. I feel like if Zion doesn't get hurt, the Pelicans actually end up winning that game. But either way, Ingram is going to be the guy to watch in this type of game, and really going forward here, because the winner of this game is going to get the Oklahoma City Thunder in the Western Conference. I don't know if we have an exact timetable on Zion Williamson just yet. If he were to be available, I do think that that could actually be a very interesting 1 versus 8 seeded matchup, even if he came back halfway through the season. The Pelicans have size, they're physical. That is sort of the antithesis of the Oklahoma City Thunder, who are a very talented team, and a lot of people are sort of looking down on. I saw Shannon Sharp the other day call them the worst number 1 seed in recent history. I don't know about going that far. I feel like we've seen some other teams. You look at the Atlanta Hawks team that was in the mid-2000s, the Boston Celtics team that won just 52 games, that ended up making the Eastern Conference Finals, but was steamrolled by the LeBron-led Cavaliers in the conference finals that year. And, you know, I just feel like the amount of talent that is on this Oklahoma City team is just totally just flying over a lot of people's heads right now. And that being said, I do feel like the Pelicans could be an interesting matchup there in the first round. I don't know quite as much about the Kings, but you gotta love the Kings just for the story that they are. They're easy to root for sure. But as for the series that we actually have in front of us, we have 6 that are set in stone between the 4-5 matchups in each conference of Orlando and Cleveland. We have Dallas and LA in the Western Conference. We have Phoenix and Minnesota in the West. We have Philadelphia and New York in the East, and we have Denver, LA, Indiana, Milwaukee. That was a very strange order I just went in, but it was also, I'm reading off of DraftKings here because I wanted to sort of look at the odds. An interesting trend here in the betting series is the fact that we have 6 of these rolled out currently. that are available, and in 3 of the series, we actually have the lower seeded team being favored. Phoenix Suns as the 6th seed, the Dallas Mavericks as a 5 seed, and the Indiana Pacers, who have now overtaken the Bucks in terms of betting favorites. They are the 6th seed in the East. Plus, we have the even odds matchup between the 76ers and the Knicks. So, very interesting how Vegas at least sees these types of matchups. And again, these are the series odds, not individual games. So there are sure to be some moving pieces. I'm sure the injury news surrounding both Giannis Antetokounmpo and around Kawhi Leonard could definitely end up shifting the odds here. But I guess we will start with the games on Saturday, where we have the Magic and the Cavs tipping off at first. With that series, I do think it's interesting because the Cavs are pretty significant favorites, the second highest odds favorites of the lines that are currently available. Now, I feel like the Celtics versus whoever they end up playing will probably be greater, and we'll see about Oklahoma City and New Orleans. But this Magic team is very interesting, and I feel like Cleveland has a lot of pressure that's sort of sneakily following them, where they're not the biggest market team, so they don't necessarily get talked about in the same light as some of these other franchises that have pressure surrounding them. But the looming Donovan Mitchell question of, can they make it work with him and Darius Garland? If things don't work, does Donovan Mitchell even want to be there? JB Bickerstaff, their head coach, after getting embarrassed by the Knicks last year in the first round, they probably have Bickerstaff, that is, probably is out of a job if they lose early in the playoffs this year. I think there's also a question surrounding both Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley. Can they play together? 2 defensive big men that can't really space the floor out. That was exposed last year. Now they're playing a Magic team who don't necessarily, on that other side of the ball, they're not going to make Cleveland pay quite as much in terms of the game being a little more physical and inside the paint. Magic aren't a very good 3-point shooting team themselves, so that does sort of go in favor of Cleveland, and I am riding with the Cavaliers in this one as well. But just saying that there is sort of an underrated pressure that surrounds this Cleveland team for the upcoming playoffs. We talked about Suns Timberwolves earlier in the week. I feel like the fact that the Suns are favored in this one is frankly kind of wrong. Now, I know how the final regular season game went between these two teams, and it was the Suns sort of running through the Timberwolves, but I feel like there's just an inconsistency level a little bit with the Suns as well. The big 3 that they were hoping to really come into play after trading for Bradley Beal. Now, he had a big game against Minnesota in that last regular season matchup, so maybe he's going to be finding his own, but I'm just not totally sold on it necessarily, and I think I'm kind of leaning with the Timberwolves in this one. Now, this could be a real potential of some junky offense down the stretch, where I've talked about it for months now. With the fact that the Suns don't have a traditional point guard, I understand some of the benefits that Devin Booker has been able to take steps in the right direction to be a better playmaker. They still don't really run plays necessarily. It's a lot of ISO down the stretch between those 3 guys, and whether or not they can actually, operate, get some real looks out of that. Now, you remember back to the beginning of the season and those first couple games, the pick and roll game between Nurkic and Devin Booker was very on point, and Nurkic, I feel like, he's really hard to evaluate for me, because I feel like I do like a lot what he provides for the Suns, but when it's too much of him, then things sort of get into a little bit of a more difficult situation. Can the big 3 stay on the court? What do they look like when they're there? We already talked on Denver, LA, and Philly, New York. So Dallas, LA here, the Clippers, that is. This is a situation where we have a lower seed being favored, partially due to the fact that the Kawhi Leonard injury status is still very much up in the air, and that is a massive concern for the Clippers, who time and time again have just been trying to get one healthy postseason run and have been unable to do so. The way that the Mavericks close the regular season, I feel like that alone may have had me leaning with them, but the fact that Kawhi is still such an unknown as well, I'm going to be rolling with the Mavericks in this one. And then final series here that we have set is the Pacers and the Bucks. Like I said, the odds just shifted in favor of the Pacers. No Giannis is a huge concern because of the way that, again, Damian Lillard, for how great his career is, he's likely going to be a future Hall of Famer, and the fact that I said likely and not guaranteed is probably going to upset some people. He is probably going to. So I don't really know what else you want me to say, but at this point in his career, I just don't know if he has Dame time in him necessarily to put the team on his back consistently through a series. This is a Pacers team that is a really rough matchup for Milwaukee, I believe, and I do think that I'm going to have to lean with the Pacers in this one, probably in a 6-7 game series, but let me know what you think about these upcoming playoff series. Should be a handful of very interesting ones, but we are going to be taking our final break now, and when we come back on the other side, I want to dive into some of the wide receiver names that have been sort of making headlines lately as the contract negotiations continue to go on. So stick with us and we will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day. I wanted to just go maybe a little bit rapid fire here on some of the situations surrounding some of the top wide receivers in the NFL, as we have had some unhappy receivers, which is not anything new. Definitely not going to call it the diva position, but it seems to be one of the positions that always have the most sort of drama surrounding it. But I want to go with maybe the least complex situations to the more complex, starting with T. Higgins, who was franchise tagged earlier this offseason, and it seemed like there were signs that potentially the Bengals could trade him. In years past, specifically last year, they said that T. Higgins was fully off the table. This year, the same personnel group said that they would be a little bit more open for business, and it seems as if Higgins was sort of upset with the situation here, knowing that he doesn't have long-term guarantees and his situation as a whole. Now, since then, it does seem like he is sort of settled into understanding the situation a little bit better here, where Higgins didn't have his best season of his career last year anyways. We know how good of a player he is, but in terms of what type of number he would be getting in free agency in terms of a contract extension after just 656 yards this past season, I don't think it would have been the number that he probably was looking for necessarily anyways. And in terms of draft compensation for Cincinnati to make it worth actually trading him for something, I don't know if it was necessarily going to be there. With a handful of these other names that we're going to be talking about in this segment, I do feel like Higgins is maybe at least somewhat of a tier below in terms of, like, I look at it from the perspective of a Patriots fan that has a really rough looking wide receiver room, and some of the other names, like I'm going to mention, I guess we'll just sort of throw them out here for the sake of this exercise, in CeeDee Lamb, AJ Brown, Brandon Ayuk. All of those players, if the Patriots traded their second round pick, which is an early second rounder, for any of them, I honestly wouldn't have any complaints. I would have real reservations about doing so for T. Higgins. He's been a number 2 wide receiver throughout his career, and there's absolutely talent there. But with the year that he had last season, I would just be very hesitant to make that massive commitment to him. And he would absolutely, again, from a Patriots perspective, be the best wide receiver in the room in New England. But I still don't think I would like the move for that type of a price. T. Higgins now has the chance to head into next season with a healthier version of Joe Burrow. His numbers, I feel like, as long as the two of them are both on the field, are going to be considerably better, and he'll head into free agency next year, where this is probably his last year with the Bengals. The Bengals are going to look to pay Jamar Chase the big time money. I believe next season is when he becomes eligible for a contract extension, and Chase is the better player, and already paying Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase the amount of money they will be, I would imagine that T. Higgins probably finds a new home, but that doesn't mean that they're not in a very, very solid position this year to go out and potentially come out of the AFC and win themselves a Super Bowl. So a little bit of a redemption tour there. One of the other situations that are currently going on here is the Courtland Sutton situation, where he heads into the last 2 years of his career, but with very little guaranteed money on his deal, just $2 million, I believe, over the course of the next 2 seasons. And he is one of the players, I think, in the NFL that probably, from at least a receiver standpoint, just does not get his shine necessarily, despite the fact that he was a massive part of the Broncos offense last year, which saw a lot of stagnancy throughout the course of the year, and yet he caught 10 touchdowns sneakily. I know this, of course, because he was on my fantasy team, so I was a little bit more tuned in there. But having a wide receiver sort of at his size, standing at 6'4", being able to be a red zone threat is someone that a lot of teams could benefit from. Now, for the Broncos, they have a lot of sort of bigger issues in terms of their roster. Are they going to be able to be a consistent red zone threat? It didn't feel like they were necessarily last year, and yet Sutton still ended up coming through for them, time and time again. His talents could possibly be better utilized on another team, so I'm not sure how this is going to play out. Sutton is currently 28 years old, so he is sort of in that window where he's entering sort of the peak years of his career. Probably one more payday, maybe another contract as well. But in terms of getting big money, he's an absolute steal of a contract right now for Denver. And I am not sure how they're necessarily going to go about this. So as things currently stand, he is skipping out on voluntary workouts. Now, a lot of the time that doesn't end up meaning anything necessarily, but it is something to at least monitor in this Denver situation where the NFL draft is coming up. There's a lot of talks about what they're going to do in terms of a quarterback. Are they going to trade up? I believe they have the 12th overall pick, unless I'm confusing them with the Raiders. But if they are going to end up taking a quarterback and think that they can have a day one starter, would definitely be beneficial for them to have a receiver such as Courtland Sutton for when the field shrinks, having that type of weapon. It is the 12th overall pick they have. They've been linked to J.J. McCarthy at times, but obviously J.J. McCarthy has seen a massive boost in terms of his stock, so I don't think that they're going to be able to pick him up there. if I'm Denver anyways, I don't know if I'm necessarily going with a round 1 quarterback because of the other holes that they have. But definitely, if you disagree with that take, let me know what you think. Brandon Ayuk is the next guy I want to touch on here. Obviously, been with the 49ers for the past 4 seasons and has been an incredible talent for them. Probably after, a disappointing rookie season and his second year in the league as well. Started off a little bit slower, but he really started getting himself going down the stretch of that year and through these past 2 as well. And the fact that he is a wide receiver too that's been putting up the numbers he has is extremely impressive. I think that it does translate to being a wide receiver 1 as well. But for the 49ers, sort of similar to Cincinnati, it's a situation where they already have as much money as they do tied up in one receiver already. Now, luckily for San Francisco, they have Brock Purdy on probably the best contract in the NFL. So they are a little bit more flexible in that instance. Truthfully, if I'm the 49ers, I am probably... I don't know, because Deebo Samuel, when he's healthy, is one of the best wide receivers in the league, but just some of the injury concerns with him are very real, and he was selected, I believe Deebo was just a year before. I think they have him under a new contract, so I don't see them necessarily moving him, but I also feel like it's something that could be an option for them moving forward. Now, I say all of this because of the fact that Ayuk has been posting all types of cryptic messages on his social media, deleting 49ers pictures, all of the sort of classic, Gen Z, or Gen X, whatever they are, millennials, who knows, but that age group, this new up-and-coming era of NFL and athlete stars using social media a little bit as a weapon to fan the flame in terms of drama. And they are going to have a very interesting debate here because I don't know if necessarily there is a right answer, because with Cincinnati, I feel like it's much more clear, just play the season out with T. Higgins, figure out everything out from there. San Francisco has a lot of different moving pieces here in terms of who they're going to be paying in the long term, how much they're going to be paying them. And, I feel like they probably also go into the season likely just trying to maximize on the amount of talent that they currently have in this situation. They were an overtime game away from winning the Super Bowl last year, where probably not, but possibly a Brock Purdy elbow injury away in 2022 when they were in the NFC Championship game. But obviously the quarterback injuries got in the way there. They're on the doorstep of winning the Super Bowl. They probably just try and maximize their opportunity as things currently stand, which is the direction I would go. But at the same time, you do have to manage that locker room and see what types of situations are sort of surrounding them to some degree. And we have 2 other wide receivers here that are, for different reasons, being talked about in CeeDee Lamb and A.J. Brown in terms of what their future looks like. A.J. Brown, he had just changed his Instagram profile picture to a picture of Tom Brady, which has a lot of people sort of signifying, or at least thinking about whether or not this means he would want to eventually become a Patriot. If you remember, before he was drafted in 2019, I believe it was, he had posted a video on social media saying, "Patriots, come get me." I think he grew up as a Patriots fan, but definitely has made the conversation interesting there. The Patriots on their end have said that they are interested in going to go out and trade for a veteran wide receiver. Like I mentioned, Ayuk, A.J. Brown. Either one of those guys could definitely be an interesting piece for them. And Philadelphia has reportedly gotten trade offers surrounding A.J. Brown, and it seems like they have told teams that he's not available. But the relationship between A.J. Brown and Philadelphia has been a little bit strange, where there was, of course, the outburst between A.J. Brown and Jalen Hurts in, I believe it was the first game of the season that they played in. If not, it was the second game of the season. And things ended up becoming really good for the two of them. A.J. Brown and Hurts were clicking, but the way that offense deteriorated as the season went on had A.J. Brown unhappy in some of these instances as well, and has at least left the door open for the possibility of him potentially leaving. As things currently stand with A.J. Brown's contract situation, he is potentially available after this year, where Philadelphia has an out after this year. A lot of his money changes so that it is not guaranteed, and the void goes on for a couple years after that as well. But he's going to be looking for a new deal as well, as he is currently 27, going into his age 27 season, and is hoping to cash in big once again. So probably staying in Philadelphia once again. But another interesting conversation here, where they just paid Devontae Smith, the Eagles did, to a new contract extension. What does the future look like for A.J. Brown and Philly? And then final situation here with CeeDee Lamb. There have been recent reports that have suggested that he could potentially hold out of the Dallas training camps that start, or they did just start. So there's some questions surrounding him because of the fact that he, Micah Parsons, and Dak Prescott are all up for contract extensions, and he wants to be a priority on this. It sounds like Micah Parsons may be willing to take a back seat to let the others get paid first. But this is another situation where the Cowboys are going to have to deal out a ton of money in the next year. And if I were them, I would consider kicking the tires on what they could get for CeeDee Lamb, because of the fact that Dak Prescott has a contract that is also going to make them still have to pay him even after this season when his contract expires. There is a void in his contract where they're going to have to be paying him at least some money. Really, the 2025 and 2026 years are where he is going to be getting the most amount of money in this type of void situation, but up through 2028 they could be paying him anyways, and it might just make more sense, especially considering where they're at. Dak Prescott is a top 10 quarterback in the league. It might just make the most sense to pay him. Micah Parsons is an absolute, game changer on the defensive side of the ball. If they could potentially get a first-round pick, maybe a couple second-round picks, I feel like that would be worth kicking the tires on for Dallas. But again, this was sort of a rapid-fire version of putting all of these different wide receiver situations together. Let me know what you think about each of these cases, if there is a specific move that you think any of these teams should be making. But that is all we have time for today. Thank you very much for tuning in to the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Follow us on socials for more exclusive content as well. And we will see you on Monday. Have a great weekend, and we will catch you then.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great.